And this is a beautiful space. When Hopi first brought me to the space and I took a look at it, I had never seen a gallery that's a hexagon. And I knew right away that this would be an amazing place to have an exhibition because of the structure of the space. So it's something as students for you guys who are going to be going out into the world to exhibit to think about, because what I saw is that it offered me these pockets or pods in which to talk about all of what I do. And I do a lot of different things. And that's not unusual for artists. If you talk to any one of your faculty who are working here, you'll hear from them about the various media, whether it's public art or sculpture or various types of printmaking and approach to art making. Hopefully they're mixing it up, because that's what keeps life interesting. And so one of the things I loved about this space is that it allowed me to talk about, have a public conversation about the various pieces and parts of my studio, the things that are going on in an organized way, which is not easy. Usually it's a big open space. So as you can see, you probably have made a few deductions about what I'm doing and why, but for a couple decades now, I've been making work that basically relates to life forms in nature and our relationship to nature, why that's important. I'm really drawn to it, very invested in it. And the beginning parts of this series were these riotous paintings, very bright, tangled depictions of gardens. And then I began to look up and think about the sky and the cosmos and that Byzantine pattern of stars and shapes and all of what you see, those deep dark holes up in the sky. And very quickly the two came together as a series, both the garden and the universe. And after thinking about them, I realized one of the things I'm really interested in both of these worlds, the garden and the cosmos, is that order that lies beneath the chaos in both. If you look at any little part, a square inch of garden or sky, or a vast vista, you'll see both something that looks beautiful and organized and perfect and as it should be, and you'll also see utter chaos, and it's impossible to understand. And why does this have to be this way and look this way? It's just, I can't sort it out. I mean, I can't get through this bramble. And I love that dichotomy and that problem, and I love the beauty of it. I love the violence of it. There's a lot of violence in nature as well as beauty. There's so many opposites, and that continually attracts me. It holds my attention. One of the platforms, I guess, or areas that caught my interest a while back was the whole idea of fractals in nature. Fractals are a complex figure. They are born out of nature, and usually as they grow themselves, a circle, for instance, is creating a self-similar shape. So it's one circle and then another, but smaller as they grow out. And I'm not necessarily interested in depicting nature per se, realistically. I love illustrations, I love Audubon, I love all of that stuff, but I'm really looking for a perch from which to glean ideas and think about nature in a different way that will allow me to find my voice visually for what I want to talk about. And fractals are one of them. Because of that repeat format, that repeat shape, you'll notice that there's a lot of dots and lines and things that are different but the same. So the bark on the tree, or the waves, or the ripples on the sand, or the clouds, all of those are the same but different. Every snowflake looks the same but different, of course. So, and that's interesting to me and attractive to me because of both the fact that they all exist as a family, but each one is completely and entirely different, like us. Being kicked down the wall and be afraid, be not afraid to ruin the piece, which I've been there. I just know what this feels like. But so yeah, fractals. I think that's been kind of a core interest. In addition to the two big worlds of nature and cosmos. I was telling a couple people earlier that for many, many, many years I lived with my husband. We're both artists in bunkers, in industrial ghettos. They're called warehouses, and had no attachment or interest in nature at all. I had never planted anything. I had never grown anything. And when my son was born, we were in an industrial ghetto in, I don't know, it was like West Oakland, 5th and Adelaide, somewhere around there. We were in 3,000 square feet, beautiful warehouse with a lot of space, and I was making big paintings. And we brought our son Tommy home to this space, and it was right after the Loma Prieta earthquake, and they were taking the cypress structure down. And by law, they had to leaflet the neighborhood to say, hey, you know, we're taking this down. There's a lot of dust in the air. We have to let you know by law that it's carcinogenic, and so we're trying to keep it tamped out by water, but this is what it is. And we knew right away we had to leave. So we left our 3,000 square foot home and found a tiny little place out near in Fruitvale of 900 square feet. So we went from 3,000 to 900 in a couple days, and it was alarming. The good news is it was on a quarter of an acre of land. So this little plot, as it was planned in the 30s, was still there, and all of these houses have either a quarter an acre, a half an acre, or almost an acre. So people across the street from us are urban farmers. So everyone's growing things, everyone's involved in nature, everyone's trading plants and dropping fruit off to one another. And so all of a sudden I got dropped into a completely different world than what I had been in before. And it changed my work radically. It was a life change. It was a huge paradigm shift for me. We ultimately built a studio out back. And so there's our small house with a brick path. It's about 50 feet. And every time I walk that path, I stop. I do something in the garden. And it's usually to pick something up or take note of something in the garden that I bring back into the studio. That's my resource. That's my inspiration. That's my perch for the day. That will sit there on my desk. That will be a part of an installation. I have a corner in the studio where I'm always adding things, whether it's constructed or real nature. And a lot of it comes from my garden, a piece of lichen or a leaf of a particular shape or a dried snail's shell. It's endless. It's endless, and that's the beauty of it. I can say a little bit more about my work, but I also want to give some time to answer your questions, and maybe even hear a little bit from you about what you're working on, and if you have questions of me in terms of your lives as artists, and you're all going to venture out into the world and do some amazing things, and so I want to leave time for that. We have a question right here. Yes.
After you changed locations, did your husband change his work at all, or was it on you?
That's an interesting question. He did not. He shifted a little later. He actually had been working and making landscapes when we were in the warehouse. So he was painting nature and skyscapes when we were in the warehouses, and then his work shifted to more. He started this series of collages with letters and words and paint over that, kind of skims of paint over that. So he almost went in the opposite direction, which is interesting. Yeah, and that's a good question. I want to say just a minute about the installation. You've noticed I work in a lot of mediums, and I talked a little bit about that and why it's of interest to me. In some ways, some of the works that you see on paper are just sketches, things that I've started either in workshops or in my studio, and that I paint on over the course of a year sometimes. I mean, I use them as ways in which to try out, what does this green glitter look like? Or, what if I use this dinosaur, will that be interesting or not, or will I have to throw it away? But they're really just places to experiment. And I do that a lot with the smaller works as well. So I brought home some shells from Cape Cod when I was there. And I just like the look of them, and I like the feel of them, and the chalky white. And I thought, what's going to happen when I pour some poor medium into these shells? Do you guys know what poor medium is? Are you who's the painters here? Poor medium, there's some really great mediums out there now with Golden and Liquitex. And I'll have to talk with some of your professors about getting one of my contacts in here to talk to you about that. But there's this great stuff called pour medium, and you can mix it with color and pour in, and it creates an amazing pool-like surface that looks like there's a little lake in your shell. Anyway, I'm doing things like that on an ongoing basis. And one of the things that I do is I'm always collecting for these installations. This is a very small build out for me. The last large piece that I did was at Reading, up in Reading at Turtle Bay Museum. And there is actually a YouTube time release of the building of that piece. That's online if you want to take a look at it. Part of this foray into installation started because I got to a point with painting where I just needed to activate the space. I'm a sculptor by trade. I studied sculpture at Michigan State University, and I loved it. And a lot of the reason I pulled away from sculpture was really just practical. I moved out west, I had no space, I had very little money, and I started to make collages and ultimately started painting, and left what I had such a close attachment to for about 10 years. And then I began to get back to it when we moved into the home and built our studio. I started to make some paintings and hang pieces in front of the paintings that were painted. The sculptural pieces were painted exactly like the painting, so they were camouflaged. And the only way you would notice that anything was sitting in front of the painting was when a very low-key fan or a slight wind would catch the sculpture and give it a little bit of movement. And you'd see that there were these globes or shapes hanging in front of the paintings. And from there it grew. From there I realized it doesn't need to be so camouflaged, it's almost invisible, which was interesting, but it just ultimately became a little too subtle for me. And I began to create these 3D landscapes. They're, again, very much about the land and all of what happens on the land. But I'm, as you can see, interested in using a mixture of both construction and faux nature and pulling those two elements together to talk about our relationship to nature and all of what's involved. What I realize in looking out whenever I have a chance to take a hike or be on the beach is that nature is so very generous and accepting. And so a lot of what I began to do is collect things that look like nature. It's curious how much we make that looks like nature that isn't nature. So part of it was a little bit of irony and I don't know, just questioning why we have to make so many things that look like nature that actually aren't nature. So part of it was my attraction to that weirdness about us human beings and why we're doing that. And part of it is that some of these faux nature pieces, this constructed nature, is I find very interesting and attractive in terms of the use in sculpture. Using real nature is wonderful, but it does die, and it breaks, and it decomposes. It does what it should do. And so, the other thing that I'm drawn to, of course, is all things green. I have a slight addiction, as you can see. And so things like the tennis balls. I don't play tennis. My father played tennis for many, many, many years and was sending me his tennis balls. And I've done a whole number of sculptures, cutting the tennis balls up and flocking the seams and putting them together and suspending them and making what are called tennis ball planets. And then some of these are paper mache, some of them are cloth. And then I've had an opportunity of when I was a couple of places where I've done exhibitions, installations, I've had an opportunity to actually weave in some real taxidermy specimens. When I was up at Turtle Bay, I was able to use their entire collection. So I was able to weave in actual bird taxidermy geese and different species of birds into the installation itself. But ultimately, I'm looking for kind of a 3D tapestry where these various elements find synergy amongst themselves and kind of splay out into a tableau that is somewhat surreal and has hopefully some humor in it, and also voices a concern about where we are with our Earth today and what we're doing to it and what we're going to do to save it. So there's a multi-layered dialogue in here. There's a little skull buried in there and various birds. So there's a lot of camouflaging, and then there's some things that don't belong, and that's intentional as well. Whether it's the Budweiser can that you might find when you're out on a hike, things of that sort. So some of it is intentionally there to just stop you in your path and wake you up a bit. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Yes, Mr. Leo.
Yeah, hi. Just a couple of questions about the decisions you make during the process. The paintings, for instance, when there's a sense of design that happens in each one, and how you organize nature, through your own filters. And maybe you could speak to some of those decisions, and also just a practical question for my students. How long do these paintings take? Because that's a question that's always asked. They're probably dying to know. And maybe just the quick kind of cheat sheet of walking them through one of your paintings, perhaps. How you start it, the middle process, and the end process, perhaps.
Yeah, most of my paintings take a long time.
Yeah.
I will say the painting in the back there, that's the 3 pieces, is the most recent. It was a commission. And I painted on it from January through April. Yeah.
She's in the studio a lot, too.
I was doing other things, and I do have a job. I work for a living. So, I painted a lot, and I painted everything. And my son is grown, so those of you who have younger kids, I know, and it's a different struggle. But I have a sketchbook, and I often start with something really basic, and it might be like a square on a page, and I take my paints, and I'll decide, like the Land of Bird 2 right there, I basically made those light spots there and played with that idea of the composition, just the basic composition. I didn't do any details at all. I was just looking like, is it going to be light in the middle, or are there going to be patches of light as looking up through from the bottom of the forest into the top of the tree, and what might be an interesting pattern for those, and that's where I start. And I often don't go any further in the sketchbook than that. I just started some new ones on Sunday, trying to get myself to use some different colors, and just giving myself a little push. And so I was really just working with shape and color in terms of the sketch. And then I start layering, and the layering is a long process overall. Once in a while it comes together really quick, but often it's a little bit more of a struggle, because what I'm doing is I'm using the mediums that I talked about. So there's a slow dry medium, which is really awesome, and there's also an airbrush medium, which can make the paint really watery. There's several different mediums that I like a lot, and that allow me to do a lot of layers really fast without using water. That's the key piece if you're working in acrylic. So, and I would say if you're a painter and you're working with that kind of detail, to have a couple of pieces going so that you can, one small, one big, two big, one small, that kind of thing. And that's often the case in my studio. So there's a lot of that, and then a lot of experimentation with pattern and how to push and pull that. So I'm covering things up, and then I'm pulling them forward again, and covering them up and pulling them forward. And a lot of it is just that process of trying to decide how dark I want it to be without losing all the detail that I spent so much time doing. So that's the trick.
So what's influencing your decision on acrylic and oil?
For me, it's I actually like acrylics where they are now. There are a lot of people married to oils. I used to work in oils. I recently packed up all my oils and put them away. I'm at a point now where I'm really happy with acrylics and what both Goldman and Liquitex are doing in terms of pigment and particularly the mediums. It's amazing what's available now. So if you guys haven't had a whole primer on that, I highly suggest it. For me, it's time. I mean, because acrylics, you can move right on along and get through a painting, or you can use something like a slow dry, you know, and turn it into what you have with oils. There's a question here. Yep. Hi.
So I make a lot of sculptures, and I was wondering what you do for you.
Oh, you were what, say again?
So as someone that makes a lot of sculptures, obviously there's a space problem, right?
Oh, what do you do with them when you're not showing them? You store them. So yeah, a lot of these, I mean, something like this is a little easier because they can just be in cartons in a corner. But if, if you're a sculptor, you might want to take a field trip to, let's see, who would be a good, like Sam Perry's studio. Who's the sculptor teacher here? I'm trying to think of who would be a good studio. Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's huge. But people figure it out, and that's why people have warehouses, so that they can, can do that. Another thing might be to decide you're going to let go of them. A good friend of mine, Ann Weber, you can look her up online, makes woven sculpture out of cardboard, and she did for instance, a residency in Italy, and she made, I think, 10 or 12 pieces, and then she gave them away. So that's that's another. She works in a they pay her to come, and she makes these sculptures. But actually, Ann's studio would be a good one to visit when she gets back. She's on a residency right now.
She's in LA now.
No, she's in LA, but she's in Michigan right now. But her studio, because her studio is packed with sculpture, but it looks great. The work is awesome. Yeah,
Kind of along that same line, in your studio, do you find yourself surrounded by your work or the stuff that inspires your work?
It's a little of both. It's a little of both. And I have to say, I'm one of those who's not terribly Catholic about when a piece is done. So I'll hang something up and I could have I haven't done this as much. I've seen it with some artists where they'll say, 2001 to 9 or something like that. So they go back in on it, and I've done that. So sometimes I want something around because it's the last of a series and I want it to inspire me. And I do have some things hanging, but I have a lot of stuff that is just pulled in from God knows where that I'm using to draw or paint or think about in terms of installation. It's a real mix.
Okay, so I have a question more like, how much technique do you use in comparison to tapping into the emotion? Because obviously this is a series that really matters so much to you, and so for me, I find it really hard sometimes to focus in on the technique, and you clearly need to stop all of your emotions sometimes and really zone in and focus on what you want to achieve with that drawing sometimes, or that piece. And so that's what I'm asking is which one, how do you balance that, or how have you balanced that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Did everyone hear that? I think every piece that you do is going to be both. And so your initial stage of conceptually deciding what that artwork is going to be is where your emotions come to the fore, and you're laying things out and figuring out what you're going to do. And as Chuck Close would say, the painter Chuck Close, you know who he is, after that it's a day job. And he really, literally, that's all he does is he works, and it's repetitive and it's hard, and he's nose to the grindstone 24/7. That's all he does. There's a small piece at the beginning that's a lot of fun, and it's oh, this idea is so rocks. I love this. And then you got to make it.
Yeah.
And then you've got to invest. You've got to invest. So think of it as an investment, that work. But that front end piece, I think the trick is to really know where you're going. and really know why you're, because otherwise you're not going to be able to put your heart behind it. You know, that's where artists get stopped up, I think, because you stop believing. It's just too hard. But if you love it, if you know it's a great idea, you will take 2 months and do the detailing that it takes to get it done. You will do it because you believe it. Yeah.
So like looking at this piece over here, all the little dots and then the swirls and stuff, are you doing all of that freehand, or are you sort of making a little stencil for yourself where you're repeating that pattern, or how are you achieving some of that repetitive pattern that we see?
A lot of it, in that piece, there actually is a little stencil, and you can see it. In that one in particular, it's an older piece. I put it in because it's a survey show, but I think that stencil is almost a little too, if I was going to be a little critical, it's almost a little too obvious. A lot of the other ones, it's by hand, or if it's using a stencil or stamp, then I'm adjusting it in some way so that it. But a lot of my painting is about a meditative process, and so the dots are a second, the 60 seconds in a minute, and the 60 minutes in an hour, and it's the work, and it's the zone in the work, and paying attention to that. And so a lot of that repetitive process I really embrace. I like it. It centers me. I have very chaotic days, and when I get to my studio, I'm really happy to focus down. And if it's just a series of dots, I'm so happy.
Are any of these for sale?
They are. Yeah, their prices are available. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So how many pieces do you work at the same time?
That's a good question. Probably, I mean, I have a lot of pieces in my studio, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this as well, where you start something and then you just think, I don't like you. I'm divorcing you. Nope, you get turned around. So there are a number of pieces where I'm working on them but not working on them because I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do. And so there might be 5 or 6 or 10 of those. And then there are usually 2 or 3 really big pieces, or at least medium-sized pieces going on that I can sink my teeth into. So I'm happy as long as there are 2 or 3 pieces in the studio where I know where I'm going and I like this piece and I'm driven to get it done. I'm a very happy person. Yeah. But I have a lot going on in my studio where I'm lost or confused. And eventually, most of it works its way out, I find.
So how did you find the direction where you want to go? Like eventually you found like this garden, cosmos. And how did you zoom into that?
A lot of it was just a life shift from leaving one part of the city and one lifestyle and landing in another.
Did you get a confirmation from other people, or is it just the tool coming from inside of you, or you got validations from many other people?
You mean in terms of galleries and like the shift?
No,
visually?
like the direction where you know this is the word, you know you want to grow like all your work around this.
I think I hit on it and I realized this is right. This is right for me. I didn't think about it at all. I think at the time actually my son was really young. I wasn't exhibiting at all. I was just making work. I was just concentrating on the work and staying alive, you know, surviving, doing my job. So it was those 3 things: family, artwork, and my curatorial work. And I was so happy to land on something that was new and interesting and vital. And it woke me up. I knew right away this is a good shift. Yeah.
You just know.
It's like the right bell. Yeah.
Do you mix all your own colors?
I mix a lot of my colors. Yeah. I mix a lot of subtle greens and shifts, blues. I usually mix something with the oranges. I'll use things right out of the tube. And again, I'll go back and say I think a lot of what's going on and with the paint companies right now is really interesting. There aren't a lot of residencies that I'm really attracted to, but there's one that's offered by Golden Paint. It's on the upstate of New York. it's a coveted residency. It's not paved, but the cool thing is they'll make anything for people. They'll make any shade of paint. They'll make any kind. They'll mix mediums. They'll like experiment for you. So you're part of their lab, and you get a studio. So check that out. Golden Paint. It's once a year, offered once a year. Deadline just passed.
Upstate?
So what's that?
Upstate.
Upstate New York. Yeah, city. But that would be of interest to me. The idea of mixing colors. And I've experimented with some other things. I mean, the other medium that I've experimented with and have had a lot of fun with is encaustic. And I think because of that idea that you can bury or layer both images and paint and objects into the wax is interesting to me. And I don't know if you've had a chance to play around with encaustic, but it's very rich and very generous medium. Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.